Why did the sky look so peaceful when everything beneath it was about to die? The first light of dawn bled over the jagged ridges of Kandahar, turning the desert gold and quiet, too quiet for a war zone. Staff Sergeant Alexis Morgan watched the horizon through the scope of her M24 rifle, the cool metal steady against her shoulder. A rifleman's eye didn't lie. Something in that valley was wrong. Her instincts screamed it, the way they always did right before the world changed. She shifted her view, scanning rock faces and scrub valleys. Nothing moved, not a bird, not a goat, not even the shimmer of distant heat, just stillness, deceptive, patient waiting. From the passenger seat beside her, Master Sergeant Frank spoke softly. "You feel it too," he said. Morgan didn't look away from her scope. Yeah, too quiet. His face was carved by decades of sand and war. A man who'd fought in places most soldiers only read about. He had that old Delta Force calm, the kind that came from surviving long enough to stop believing in luck. He was 60, gray at the temples, steady as a rifle barrel, and the only man she'd ever allowed to call her kid. The radio crackled in front of them. Viper Actual, the command center, issued orders through static. Viper 2, continue movement. Objective village by sundown, acknowledge. Exhaled slowly, jaw tightening. "They're blind," he muttered. "They're sending us through a choke point." Morgan glanced up from her optics. The convoy of 3 Humvees rumbled deeper into the valley ahead, engines echoing off the canyon walls. The sun was climbing, baking the landscape. It felt like walking into a trap, and everyone knew it except command. She studied his face. "You tried to warn them." "I told Harrison last night." His voice hardened. "Showed him satellite scans, activity that wasn't on the intel reports. He ignored it, said my concerns were noted." Morgan gave a dry half-smile. "That's command talk for shut up and drive." He nodded, not smiling back. "Keep your weapon ready. If we hit trouble, aim high ground first." Her finger rested along the trigger guard. Every muscle in her body was tight but controlled. She learned long ago that fear was useless unless it sharpened you. The convoy moved another half-mile. And then the world ended. A flash, so white it erased sound. The lead Humvee lifted clean off the ground, twisted midair, and came down in a blossom of dust and fire. The concussion slammed through Morgan's chest like a hammer, tossing her head first into the side of the vehicle. "IED," shouted, but his voice was drowned by the shriek of RPGs streaking from both sides of the valley. "Fire, smoke, screams." "Contact front and both sides," Morgan yelled, already grabbing her rifle. She swung toward the nearest muzzle flash and fired. 1 round, 2, 3, each shot crisp, mechanical, precise. Was on the radio, voice steady despite the chaos. "Viper Actual, this is Viper 2. Heavy contact. Multiple RPGs, troops in contact. We need immediate air support." The radio answered with static. Morgan caught movement, a silhouette on the ridge. She fired again, saw him drop, but there were too many, dozens, maybe more. It wasn't an ambush by chance. This was coordinated, perfectly timed. Someone had told them the convoy route. Then came the second explosion. An RPG slammed into their vehicle's flank. The blast threw her clear, spinning her into the rocks. She hit hard, pain exploding through her ribs and shoulder. The world tilted. Dust and blood filled her mouth. For a moment she couldn't hear anything except a ringing so loud it drowned her thoughts. Then came the gunfire. Dozens of AKs close, too close. She crawled behind a rock outcropping, every movement a war against the pain in her side. Her left arm hung useless, dislocated. Gritting her teeth, she slammed it back into its socket. The scream that escaped her was soundless, caught somewhere between agony and rage. Her vision steadied. She scanned the chaos below. The first Humvee was gone. The second, their own, was burning. The third was overturned, black smoke billowing skyward. And there, dragging himself toward cover, was She was beside him in seconds, pulling him behind a rock. His leg was a ruin of blood and shrapnel, crimson pooling fast beneath him. "Stay still," she hissed, already tearing open her med kit. She looped a tourniquet around his thigh, twisted it tight. The blood flow slowed but didn't stop. "Listen to me," said through clenched teeth. This was no random hit. No way the Taliban got that kind of timing on their own. Morgan pressed a dressing to the wound. "You're losing too much blood." He grabbed her wrist, hard despite his fatting strength. "Someone fed them our route." Her eyes snapped to his. "You're saying there's a traitor?" He nodded, grimacing. "High up, maybe in command." Morgan looked at the radio, its cracked casing hissing with static. "I'll call for medevac." "It's receive only," he said. "We're cut off." As if to prove him right, the radio suddenly came alive with fragments of distant voices. "Viper actual to all units, heavy contact in the valley. Battalion strength enemy converging. All units withdraw immediately. Extraction impossible. Repeat, withdraw." His eyes flickered toward hers. Then came the words that hollowed her chest. "Unable to locate Morgan or presumed KIA. All units withdraw, out." They were leaving them. Morgan stared at the radio, disbelief choking her. "They think we're dead." Coughed, blood flecking his lips. "No, Morgan, they decided we're dead." The betrayal hit harder than the blast had. Abandoned, written off, just names on a report. She pressed another bandage against his side. "I'm not leaving you." "Yes, you are." His voice was fatting. "You have to get the intel back. Someone has to know what happened here." "Don't," she whispered. "Don't you dare give me that order." He reached into his pocket, pulled out a folded map, a small GPS, and his compass, the same one he'd carried since Desert Storm. The brass glinted in the dusty light. "Take these," he said. "My kabar's in my boot, take that too." Her throat tightened. "I can stabilize you until they—" "They're not coming," he interrupted, eyes burning with the last of his strength. "You've got to survive, that's the mission now." She shook her head. "I'm not leaving you." He grabbed her collar, forced her to look at him. "You're the best student I ever had. Now prove it." The words cut deeper than any wound. Voices echoed closer, Taliban shouting in Pashto. She could see their shadows flicker against the rocks. His breathing grew ragged. "Go," he said. "That's an order." She hesitated only long enough to squeeze his hand. "I'll send help." "I know you will," he smiled faintly. "Make it expensive for them." Then he pushed her away. Morgan moved uphill, slipping into a narrow ridge. From there, she could see drag himself into the open, rifle steady despite his wounds. The Taliban came in from 3 sides. He opened fire. The muzzle flashes below painted the rocks in violent orange. She could see him fighting until his last magazine ran dry, then pulling something from his vest. A grenade. He looked up once as if searching for her, and then he pulled the pin. The explosion shook the valley. When the dust cleared, he was gone. Morgan bit her lip until it bled, forcing herself not to scream. The pain in her chest wasn't just physical anymore. It was grief wrapped in fury. She turned away, heart hammering. "You'll be brought home," she whispered. "I swear it." She checked her gear, rifle intact, 2 pistols, 30 rounds, 1 half-empty water canteen. Her ribs ached with every breath, her shoulder throbbed, but she was alive. Behind enemy lines, alone, abandoned. She looked west, where the sun was beginning to fall behind the mountains. That was friendly territory, hundreds of kilometers away. Maybe more. Between her and safety was nothing but open desert and thousands of enemy fighters. But she'd been trained for this. Seer, survival, evasion, resistance, escape. She'd memorized it, lived it, and now she would have to survive it. She adjusted his compass in her hand. The needle pointed west. The brass was warm against her skin, still stained with his blood. "All right, old man," she whispered. Let's see if your compass still works." She moved, slowly, methodically, staying to the shadows. Every step away from the valley was a step toward life and vengeance. By noon, the heat was a living thing pressing down on her. The water in her canteen was nearly gone. Her throat burned, but she didn't stop. Couldn't. She found an overhang of rocks and crawled beneath it, catching her breath. Her ribs screamed every time she inhaled. Her shoulder pulsed like fire. She taped her ribs, cleaned the worst of her cuts, forced herself to drink in small sips. Then she lay back and closed her eyes. Behind her eyelids came flashes, space, the convoy burning, the radio declaring her dead. She wanted to cry, but tears were useless out here. Instead, she breathed, slow, steady, controlled. "Focus on the mission," she murmured. "Survive, evade, return." The desert wind whispered over the rocks, carrying distant voices, enemy patrols searching. They were close, too close. She flattened against the ground, heart thudding until the sound faded. When darkness finally came, she rose. The stars unfolded above her, thousands of them, cold and indifferent. She used them to set her path west, step by step, breath by breath. She didn't think about the distance, didn't think about the odds. She thought about's last words, about the promise she'd made. Somewhere out there, a traitor had sent them to die. And she was going to find out who. But first, she had to survive the night. Sometimes survival isn't about strength. It's about refusing to die on someone else's terms. What does courage sound like when no one's there to hear it? For Staff Sergeant Alexis Morgan, it was the sound of sand grinding under her boots and the echo of her own breathing. Nothing else. No radio chatter, no teammates, no command. Just the slow, rhythmic march of a soldier the world had already buried. The desert stretched endlessly around her, a sea of rock and silence. The stars above were cold and sharp, the only witnesses left to her existence. She moved through the darkness like a shadow stitched into the land, keeping low, using the jagged ridges as cover. Every few minutes she stopped, listening the way animals do when they know something is hunting them. Somewhere out there, men were searching for her, dozens, maybe hundreds. They didn't know her name, only that she was American and alive. That was enough. At dawn, she found a shallow cave formed by collapsed boulders. It wasn't much, but it gave her shelter from the heat and visibility from above. She crawled inside, lay flat, and began the first ritual of survival: assessment. Ribs taped but sore. Shoulder stable enough to function. Ammunition, 29 rounds rifle, 2 mags sidearm. Water, half a canteen. Food, none. Radio, receive only static hiss. Mental state, functional, but the silence was starting to weigh on her. She cleaned her rifle, every motion precise, methodical. In a world of chaos, small acts of discipline kept her sane. When she finished, she took out's compass, holding it in the thin beam of morning light that crept through the rocks. The brass gleamed dully, its glass scratched, but the needle still moved. She smiled faintly. "Guess you weren't lying, old man." Outside, the world was already blazing with heat. She rationed water with a surgeon's care, 1 sip every 2 hours. Dehydration kills faster than bullets, and she knew exactly how long the human body could last. Still, she could feel her strength fading. It wasn't just exhaustion. It was the weight of absence, the empty space where his voice used to be. He'd been her anchor. Now he was gone, and the compass in her hand was all that remained. By nightfall, she began moving again, west toward the thin line of mountains that marked the edge of Taliban-controlled territory. Each step was deliberate. Each sound she made felt like an invitation to death. Hours passed before she realized she'd been holding her breath for most of it. On the second night, she saw headlights far off in the distance, a convoy crawling through the valley floor. She dropped to her stomach and peered through her scope. 10 vehicles, at least 30 fighters. They were sweeping the area, searching for her. She watched as the lead truck stopped near the wreckage of what used to be her convoy. The men climbed out, shining flashlights over the charred remains. Then one of them said something into a radio, and they all started laughing. Morgan's jaw tightened. She couldn't hear the words, but she didn't need to. She could guess. They thought she was dead, or they wanted to be the ones to make her that way. She thought of a grenade detonating in that same valley. Her grip on the rifle tightened. "No," she whispered, "not yet." Killing them now would be satisfying but suicidal. She turned away, forcing herself to keep moving. Survival first, revenge later. Days blurred together. She moved at night, hid during the day, scavenged what she could, a half-empty bottle from an abandoned lookout post, a ration pack torn open by animals, a rusted canteen left behind by a fighter who'd never need it again. Her body weakened, but her focus sharpened. The pain became background noise, a familiar companion. Hunger stopped mattering. The world reduced itself to simple math: distance, water, cover, time. By the 5th day, she'd covered more than 50 kilometers. But the enemy search had grown. She could see their patrols now, trucks moving in grids, men with radios and dogs. The desert was alive with the hum of their engines. She found a high ridge and stayed low, observing. Below, a Taliban unit was setting up camp. 30 men, armed, alert, positioned like they expected trouble. They were communicating on radios, disciplined, almost military. That wasn't normal. She adjusted her scope, listening through the wind. Then she heard it. A radio transmission, faint but clear. "Command confirms American female operative alive in sector. High-value target. Capture alive for interrogation." Morgan froze. They knew. They knew she was still breathing. Her pulse quickened, but not from fear, from calculation. Capture meant torture, interrogation, propaganda. She'd seen what they did to prisoners. She wouldn't let it happen, not to her. The hunted became the hunter in that instant. They wanted her alive, then she'd make them regret it. She tracked the patrol through her scope, studying their movements, their discipline, their weakest point. The man carrying extra ammunition lagged behind. He struggled under the weight, separated from the main group by 20 meters. Perfect. She waited until the wind shifted. Then she exhaled and squeezed the trigger. The round cracked through the night air, suppressed by distance and echo. The man dropped without a sound. His ammunition spilled across the sand. Before the others reacted, she was gone, repositioning, silent and invisible. Confusion spread through the patrol. They shouted, scattered, aimed at shadows. She watched them panic, then strike again. One shot. The radio operator fell, his equipment shattered. Now they couldn't call for help. By dawn, the once-organized patrol had broken completely, retreating, disoriented, terrified of an unseen enemy. Morgan lay in the rocks above, watching the chaos unfold below her, chest rising and falling with controlled breaths. His voice seemed to echo in her head, "Make it expensive for anyone hunting you." She had, and she wasn't done. That night, she reached a ravine where a small outpost guarded the only known water source for miles. Through her scope, she counted 8 fighters. A heavy machine gun on the roof. 2 guards at the gate. Discipline poor, confidence high. Good. She needed water, food, and a working radio. And she was done hiding. She waited until the guard changed, that perfect sliver of time when attention wavered. Then she took her first shot. The heavy gunner never made it to his post. The second shot shattered the command tent lantern, plunging the camp into chaos. By the time the fighters figured out where the shots came from, she was already flanking. Her rounds came from different angles, echoing across the rocks. To them, it sounded like an entire squad. 2 more dropped trying to reach the machine gun. Another fell as he ran for cover. The survivors did what undisciplined men always did when confronted with ghosts. They ran. When silence fell again, Morgan waited, patient as stone. Then she moved in. Inside the outpost, the air reeked of cordite and fear. She checked each body, collected ammunition, filled her canteen from their reserve tank, and found what she'd hoped for, a functioning radio. She didn't stay long. Gunfire would draw attention. 5 kilometers away, hidden among rocks, she keyed the transmitter. Her voice was hoarse but steady. "Any American forces, this is Viper 2 Actual. Staff Sergeant Alexis Morgan. I am alive and operating in hostile territory. Convoy destroyed 5 days ago. Presumed KIA. Request immediate assistance." Static. She tried again. Changed frequency. Nothing. "I have intelligence on a possible command-level security breach. Convoy ambushed under compromised orders. If anyone hears this, I'm still fighting." She transmitted 3 times. Then she destroyed the radio. If the signal was picked up, good. If not, it didn't matter. What mattered was that she'd tried, and that someone somewhere might have heard. Far away, 400 kilometers northwest, a SIGINT station caught a faint pulse across an emergency channel. A young technician looked up, confused. "Sir, we just got a transmission. Staff Sergeant Alexis Morgan. She was declared KIA 5 days ago." The colonel leaned over the console. "Authentication." "No code, sir, but the voice, the call sign, tactical details, they match." The colonel's jaw clenched. "Get this to Special Operations Command, now." Morgan didn't know she'd been heard. She didn't expect rescue. Hope was dangerous out here. Hope made you slow. And slow got you killed. Still, as she sat in the cool shadows of the canyon, listening to the faint hum of the wind, she allowed herself one small thought. If someone was listening, maybe sacrifice wouldn't be forgotten. She took out his compass again. The needle trembled, then settled. West, always west. She adjusted her pack, checked her rifle, and whispered to the empty desert. "Come on then, let's finish what you started." And with that she moved, a ghost in enemy territory, bleeding but unbroken, her silhouette fading into the moonlit dunes. The desert has no mercy. But sometimes it teaches it. What happens when the dead start talking again? For 6 days, the name Staff Sergeant Alexis Morgan had been etched in the official record, KIA. Her body never recovered, her equipment presumed destroyed, her story already mourned. Until a signal bled through the static. It was faint, half-broken words carried by a damaged transmitter, bouncing off the Afghan mountains into the stratosphere. But the voice was unmistakable. Calm, professional, alive. Viper 2 Actual Staff Sergeant Alexis Morgan. I am alive, operating in hostile territory. In a dim operations room somewhere in Qatar, a young comms officer tore off his headset. "Sir, you need to hear this." The recording played again, distorted by distance and interference. The officer's superior, Colonel Blake, listened in silence, his jaw tightening. He knew that voice. He'd read her file. He'd signed her death confirmation. When the transmission ended, he stared at the map glowing on the wall. "If that's really her," he said quietly, "we've got one hell of a problem." Hundreds of miles away, Morgan crouched in the shelter of an eroded ridge, staring at the horizon. The desert shimmered like molten glass. The air was thick with heat and silence. She had no way of knowing her message had reached anyone, but something in her gut told her that it had. And that meant new danger. If she could send a signal, the enemy could trace it. They'd be moving toward her now, searching for the voice that shouldn't exist. She checked her rifle, ensuring every moving part was clean. She ate a handful of sand-dried dates she'd found in the outpost rations. Bitter, but calories were calories. Her shoulder ached, her ribs were on fire, Her throat burned with every breath, but she moved anyway, west, always west. The compass needle trembled, caught between faith and magnetism. She smiled faintly. You and me both, old man. By late afternoon, she spotted movement, not enemy, not local. Too far in the distance, sweeping low along the horizon. Too far to signal, too risky to reveal herself. She watched as they passed, the faint thud of their rotors fading into silence. Keep looking, she whispered. I'm right here. At the Special Operations Command Center, the world had stopped for the duration of a single voice message. The room hummed with quiet disbelief as analysts replayed the captured signal again and again, filtering noise, isolating tone, cadence, breath pattern. It was her. The colonel in charge, James, a man who'd led Delta teams through hell and back, leaned over the playback equipment, eyes narrowed. She didn't authenticate, one officer said, but her phrase structure matches Morgan's field protocols. The way she says, Viper 2 actual, that's her. Nodded, she wouldn't waste words. She knew her radio was compromised. Another analyst spoke up. Sir, she mentioned command-level compromise, that our convoy was set up. The room fell silent. Exhaled through his nose, slow and heavy. That's a hell of an accusation to make when you're bleeding out in enemy country. Unless she's right, said another voice, young, cautious. Turned toward the intelligence display. Satellite imagery glowed across the screens, grainy heat signatures, faint signs of movement. They'd found evidence consistent with Morgan's path. Scattered enemy patrols, a destroyed outpost, burned vehicles, empty water caches. All of it matched her report. She's alive, said finally, and still fighting. Sir, an operator began. Enemy chatter confirms they're searching for a female American sniper. They're calling her the ghost of Kandahar. A faint smile touched face. That sounds like her. He straightened. Prep a QRF package. 2, full Delta rescue detachment. If she's still moving west, we'll find her. Sir, an aide interjected. Airspace over that valley is red, heavy anti-aircraft presence. We can't just fly in. Tone hardened. Then we fly low, nap of the earth, and pray she's where she said she'd be. Meanwhile, Morgan climbed a barren slope under moonlight, her body trembling from fatigue. Every step felt like it might be her last, but she kept going. The human body can do strange things when driven by purpose, and Morgan's purpose burned hotter than pain. She reached the top of a ridge and stopped to rest, gazing out across the endless sand. Her shadow stretched long under the pale light. The valley below was quiet, but she could see faint campfires scattered like dying stars. Enemy search teams. She pulled out her map's map. It was marked in pencil, small notations only a seasoned operator would understand. Water sources, routes, dead zones. At the bottom, faintly scrawled, were the words, "If you're reading this, kid, trust your training, not your orders." Her throat tightened. I'm trying, Frank. She studied the terrain. Ahead, a valley floor surrounded by high ground. Good, defensible. She made her decision. She gathered rocks and spelled a single message across the sand, visible only from the air. MV 847392, 2200 HRS. Her rendezvous point. If anyone was looking for her, if anyone had read the transmission, they'd know what it meant. 12 hours later, a drone flying a surveillance sweep caught sight of something unnatural in the valley. A pattern of rocks, grid coordinates, and a time. The operator zoomed in. Sir, we've got something. Leaned over the feed. The symbols were unmistakable. Morgan, he whispered, you stubborn, brilliant woman. He turned to his team. Prep for extraction, we move tonight. At dusk, Morgan huddled under the ridge, watching through her scope as distant enemy convoys moved east. She'd chosen her ground well, narrow approaches, rock cover, clear line of sight in all directions. Her body screamed for rest, but she stayed awake. The sound of her heartbeat felt louder than the wind. At 21:45, she heard it faint at first, then growing. Helicopters. She rose, scanning the darkness. The valley came alive with motion. Dust whipped across the ground as two skimmed low, their navigation lights dimmed. The sound was the sweetest thing she'd ever heard. Her radio hissed. Rescue 1 to Viper 2 actual. Confirm identity. She pressed the transmit key. Rescue birds, this is Viper 2 actual. About time you showed up. LZ is cold for now, but I expect company within 10 minutes. Taliban QRF was active half a click east 20 minutes ago. Recommend rapid extraction. There was a pause, then a voice replied, amused, relieved, alive. Viper 2 actual, this is Rescue 1. Good to hear your voice. Moving to your position now. Morgan exhaled. Copy that, I'll keep it warm for you. The descended, rotors tearing through the dust. One hovered while the other landed. Delta operators poured out, weapons scanning, eyes wide. And then they saw her. Standing there, blood-stained and sunburned, rifle at the ready, eyes sharp despite exhaustion. She looked less like a survivor and more like a revenant, the ghost they'd been told about. Ma'am, we're here to bring you home, one of the operators called. Morgan lowered her weapon. Took you long enough. The team leader grinned. We got a little lost. They moved quickly, forming a perimeter as they loaded her aboard the Wading. Just as the engine spooled up, distant gunfire echoed sharp, closing fast. The enemy had found the LZ. Contacts East Ridge, someone shouted. The second helicopter opened fire, roaring. Tracers carved through the dark, lighting up the desert. The first bird lifted, banking hard as rounds snapped past the fuselage. Inside, Morgan gripped the seat rail, watching the ground fall away. The ridge was on fire now. Figures scattered below, tiny shadows running for cover. She whispered under her breath, half to herself, half to the ghost she was leaving behind. Good night, Frank. The flight back to base was a blur of noise and exhaustion. The medic tried to check her wounds, but she waved him off. Cracked ribs, dislocated shoulder already reset. Nothing life-threatening. Ma'am, he said, you've been out there 6 days alone. Most people wouldn't last 6 hours. She looked at him, eyes fierce despite the hollow fatigue. They left me out there, declared me dead. I wasn't about to die just to prove them right. She turned her gaze out the open side door. The desert stretched below, endless, silent, indifferent. The compass in her hand gleamed faintly under the cabin light. She turned it over in her palm, feeling its weight, the memory of the man who'd given it to her. Brought your compass back, old man, she whispered. Still works. As the helicopter banked toward the lights of forward operating base Condor, Morgan's reflection stared back at her from the window, dirt-streaked, eyes hollow but burning. The others saw a soldier rescued from hell. But she knew the truth. The mission wasn't over. It had just changed. Someone inside the command structure had sold them out. Someone had sent in her to die. And she was going to find out who. The touchdown, dust swirled, the base floodlights cut through the night. She stepped off the ramp under her own power, ignoring the stretcher. Every head turned. The ghost of Kandahar had come home. She didn't say a word, just walked, slow, steady, toward the command building where Colonel waited, disbelief and pride mixed on his face. The mission had ended where it began, under the same burning sky. But something fundamental had changed in her. The enemy was no longer out there in the mountains. It might be sitting behind a desk, wearing the same uniform she did. And that thought was colder than the desert night. Why did the base feel colder than the desert she'd escaped? They called her a hero when she stepped off the cameras, medics, senior officers lining the perimeter like it was a damn parade. But to Staff Sergeant Alexis Morgan, it didn't feel like triumph. It felt like theater. Applause for the woman who wasn't supposed to exist anymore. And in the middle of it all, she could still smell the smoke of the convoy, the charred metal, the blood, the silence after the last explosion. Her boots hit the concrete and the applause died down. Someone shouted, "Welcome home, Sergeant." She didn't answer. She just kept walking. The sun was just rising over Fob Condor, slicing the horizon with that same golden light she'd seen before everything went wrong. The same light that had preceded death. She felt its heat on her face and wanted to turn away. A medic jogged beside her. "Ma'am, you need to sit down. You've got 3 cracked ribs, possible infection, dehydration." "I've had worse hangovers," she muttered, brushing past him. He blinked. "You're not even limping." "I don't limp for anyone," she said. They didn't know what to do with her. The living ghost, the soldier who'd refused to die on cue. Within an hour, she was ushered into a secure room inside the command compound. Concrete walls, steel door, air thick with recycled cold. No windows. A single chair. A table. A folder with her name on it, Morgan, ALEXISJ status, deceased revised. She stared at the word deceased, like it was a bad joke someone forgot to erase. The door opened. Colonel James entered, carrying a mug of black coffee. His uniform was immaculate, but his eyes showed the kind of fatigue only war could print into a man's soul. He set the mug down in front of her. "Don't ask what's in it," he said. "Just drink." She raised an eyebrow. "You sure it's not poison? I hear those work faster." He cracked a dry smile. "You always were a piece of work, Sergeant." She sipped the coffee, bitter, strong, grounding. "Then you heard my transmission." "Every word," he said. "Half the Pentagon did, too. You've made quite a mess, Morgan." Alive soldiers tend to do that. He pulled up a chair and sat across from her. "Tell me what happened out there, everything." So she did. From the first IED blast to his last breath. From the sound of the radio declaring her dead to the faces of the men who hunted her across the desert. She told it clean, factual, stripped of emotion, the way operators are trained to brief. But every so often, her voice cracked, just enough to betray the truth beneath the discipline. When she finished, the room was silent. "Lean back, hands clasped. I read your after-action logs from before the mission. You and both raised concerns about the route." He said it was compromised. Harrison overruled him. "Major Harrison asked." She nodded, said intel was clear, that we were overreacting. Jaw tightened. "Harrison's report says otherwise, claims you deviated from orders, led the convoy off course." Her eyes hardened. "He's lying." "I know," said quietly. "I checked the satellite logs. Your GPS trail followed orders exactly." "So he's covering his tracks." "Or someone else's," murmured. Morgan leaned forward, said the timing was too perfect. He thought someone in command sold us out. Didn't answer immediately. He looked at the table, fingers drumming once before he spoke. "Officially, this meeting never happened. Unofficially, I agree with him." Her pulse kicked. "You think it's Harrison?" "Could be," he said. "Could also be the intel chain above him. Someone fed your route to the enemy, Morgan. That much I'm sure of." She swallowed hard. "So what now?" "Now you rest," said. "Medical clears you. You debrief again in D.C. You'll get your medal, your story, your quiet discharge if you want it." She stared at him. "You think I'm walking away?" He met her gaze. "You think you can fight a ghost inside the system? You'd be up against people who write the system." "I don't care," she said softly. "Someone killed my team. I'm not leaving until I find out who." There was a pause, long enough for the air between them to grow heavy. Then leaned forward, lowering his voice. If you want the truth, you'll need to be invisible again, the same way you were out there. Her brow furrowed, meaning, I'll make your resurrection temporary. As far as command knows, you're still KIA, gives you room to move, ask questions, no spotlight. She studied him carefully. Why are you helping me? He hesitated, then gave the kind of answer only a soldier could give. Because I've buried too many good people under bad orders. She nodded slowly, then let's get to work. Later that night, the base quieted under a bruised purple sky. The distant thump of generators was the only sound. Morgan sat alone outside the infirmary, watching the desert wind drag loose sand across the landing pad. She hadn't slept since extraction. Her body refused to relax. Every creak, every echo felt like danger. The instinct was still there, wired into her bones. The habit of not trusting peace. From the shadows, someone approached. A woman, tall, lean, wearing Special Forces insignia. Captain Riley Torres, one of the Delta team leaders from the rescue operation. Figured I'd find you out here, Torres said, lighting a cigarette. You're the quiet type. Quiet types don't sleep. Morgan smirked faintly. Neither do rescuers, apparently. Torres exhaled a stream of smoke. That stunt in the valley, you made half my team question their training. Hell of a thing what you did out there. Didn't do it for medals. I know, Torres said. That's why it matters. A long silence passed between them. Two soldiers who'd seen too much, saying everything without words. Finally Torres asked, what's next for you? Morgan stared into the distance. I'm going to find whoever turned that valley into a graveyard, and when I do, she trailed off, jaw tightening, they'll wish I stayed dead. Torres nodded slowly. If you need eyes or ears, you know where to find me. Morgan looked at her, surprised. You'd risk that. I don't like being lied to, Torres said simply, and someone lied big. She dropped the cigarette, crushed it beneath her boot, and walked away, leaving Morgan alone with the whisper of the wind. By morning, word of Morgan's survival had already begun to spread through unofficial channels. Someone in communications had leaked a single line to an embedded journalist. SEAL sniper previously declared KIA possibly alive. No official comment. Slammed the report onto his desk. Damn it, we had one job, keep her ghost status intact. His aide looked uneasy. It wasn't us, sir, could come from DC. He rubbed his temples. If it reached the press, it's political, and if it's political, someone's getting nervous. He looked up at the operations map. Morgan's existence just became leverage. Morgan stood in front of the mirror in the base barracks. Her uniform was replaced with civilian fatigues, unmarked, generic. Her dog tags lay on the counter, cold against the metal. She hesitated before picking them up. His compass lay beside them. She stared at both, one symbolizing who she was, the other what she'd become. Then she pocketed the compass and left the tags behind. She wasn't a soldier anymore. She was a ghost on her own mission. The first lead came from a quiet corner of the base cafeteria. A logistics officer named Sergeant Miles, nervous, fidgeting, eyes darting. He'd handled convoy manifests that week, the ones Morgan never saw. You didn't get those route updates directly from Intel Command, she asked. He shook his head. Came through Harrison's channel. He said it was last-minute new recon input. Morgan leaned closer. Did it look official? He hesitated. It had the right encryption stamp, but the sender code, it was different. Looked like an old clearance level, outdated. Whose clearance? He swallowed. Colonel Washington desk. Morgan froze. He retired last year. Miles looked around, lowering his voice. Maybe on paper, but someone used his credentials. She sat back, heart pounding. Someone inside Pentagon-level intel had hijacked an old officer's access, used it to reroute her convoy into a death trap. That wasn't a field mistake. That was deliberate. She left the cafeteria without another word. Her pulse thundered in her ears. The deeper she looked, the darker it got. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore. It was about control. Someone wanted her team erased, and her silence guaranteed. That night, Morgan stood alone near the perimeter wall, the desert stretching endlessly beyond. The wind tugged at her hair, carrying the scent of dust and jet fuel. She thought about the promise she'd made. She could almost hear his voice. If you're alive, don't waste it. She closed her eyes. I won't, she whispered. I'm coming for them. In the distance, a convoy of supply trucks rolled out under the starlight. Beyond them, darkness, unknown freedom. She adjusted her pack, slung her rifle, and stepped into the shadows beyond the gate. No salute, no ceremony, no goodbye. Just silence. Some ghosts stay behind to haunt their past. Others keep walking until they find the living who deserve to be haunted. And as the base lights faded behind her, Alexis Morgan became exactly that. Sometimes the hardest war isn't the one you fight to survive. It's the one you fight after surviving. How do you hunt an enemy who wears the same uniform as you? For Alexis Morgan, the answer was simple. You stop being a soldier. You start being a shadow. She left Fob Condor 2 nights after slipping past the perimeter, moving under the cover of a supply convoy headed north. By the time they crossed into Allied territory, her trail had already vanished. To command, she was still dead. To the world, she was a ghost. She kept it that way. Her first stop was a refueling point near, small, remote. The kind of place nobody asked questions as long as you looked like you belonged. And she did. A cap pulled low, unmarked fatigues, a backpack too light for comfort. Her movements were quiet, efficient, the look of someone with orders no one wanted to know. She bought a ride from a transport driver heading west, an Afghan man named, who used to run supply routes for coalition forces before the region collapsed into chaos. He didn't talk much, but when he did, he asked questions that told her he wasn't stupid. You're American, he said after an hour, but not here for a war. She met his eyes briefly. You could say that. He smiled faintly. Then you are here for something harder. They drove for hours through canyons painted in twilight, silence heavy between them. Occasionally, she glanced at the compass in her hand, watching the needle tremble every time the truck hit a rut. She still talked to it sometimes, quietly, like it was listening. Still pointing true, old man, she murmured once, even when I don't. Her next lead came from a name had whispered before she left, former intelligence analyst, discharged 2 years earlier under vague circumstances. She worked logistics encryption for CENTCOM, and more importantly, she'd handled Colonel's clearance profile. If someone hijacks credentials to reroute Morgan's convoy, might know how. Finding her wasn't easy. Had disappeared into the noise of Istanbul, a place where spies, mercenaries, and burned soldiers all went to forget what they'd done. Morgan arrived at night, rain slicking the streets, neon lights bleeding into puddles. She moved like she always did, careful, deliberate, scanning reflections in shop windows, tracking shadows that didn't belong. Old instincts never faded. She found in a basement sitting behind a laptop, surrounded by screens showing code and data fragments. When Morgan approached, looked up, wary, sharp-eyed, wearing the kind of expression that said, I've run from worse things than you. Morgan said softly, You're supposed to be dead. Yeah, Morgan replied, I missed the memo. Lean back, you shouldn't be here, if the wrong people know you're alive. They already do, Morgan cut in, which means the right people need to as well. Someone used clearance to feed false intel. My team died because of it. His eyes narrowed, you're sure? Morgan dropped a small encrypted drive on the table. This came from Fob Condor's archive. Timestamp, authorization chain, encryption hash, all wrong. Whoever sent it used its retired access key. You built that system. You tell me how it's possible. Inserted the drive, typing fast. The code scrolled across the screens in pale green light. Minutes passed in silence. Finally exhaled. You're right. This isn't a spoof. It's internal. Someone with administrative override built a mirror access chain inside the clearance network. In English, Morgan said. Looked at her. Someone in Joint Intelligence Command created a fake clearance server, a ghost system running parallel to the real one. It uses dead credentials to issue live orders. Which means someone up high is rewriting reality, finished. Your convoy, the mission, everything that happens in that system becomes official record. If they wanted you to walk into an ambush, it wouldn't even look like one. Morgan's jaw tightened. Can you trace it? Maybe, but if I dig too deep, I'll light up every alarm from here to Arlington. Do it anyway. Stared at her for a long moment, then sighed. You never did learn to take the easy road. Morgan smirked. Didn't have a teacher long enough to show me. Hesitated at the reference. Morgan nodded. He deserved better. For a moment neither spoke, then turned back to the screen. You'll need protection. Once this starts, they'll come looking for whoever's stirring ghosts. I've been hunted before, Morgan said. Not like this, replied. These people don't miss. Over the next 2 days, worked without sleep. Morgan kept watch, changing, blending in, always ready to move at a moment's notice. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw that convoy again. The blast, the fire, his last look before he pulled the pin. Every sound, every smell, burned into her memory. Sometimes she woke up mid-breath, hand reaching for a rifle that wasn't there. Sometimes she sat up and whispered to the dark. Hold me accountable, Frank, not them. On the third night found it. She spun the screen toward Morgan. Got it. The ghost servers host point routes through a private contractor's network. Officially, it's civilian logistics support. Morgan frowned. Name. His fingers danced across the keyboard. Raptor Systems. Morgan froze. I've heard that name. You should have, said. They're embedded across half of DoD's infrastructure. Encryption, communications, drone telemetry. You name it, they touch it. Morgan's pulse quickened. That means they see everything, said, and they control what gets seen. A deep unease settled over Morgan's gut. Raptor Systems wasn't just a contractor. It was a shadow company, founded by former military officers, protected by defense deals, invisible to oversight. She'd heard rumors back in training, whispered stories about the private chain, where missions went to vanish and bodies turned into statistics. She stared at, how far does this go? Hesitated, far enough that if you push this, you'll never see daylight again. Morgan's voice was cold. Then I'll make sure they don't either. That night Morgan and left the city. The sky was clear, the moon a pale coin above the sea. They moved fast, heading toward an airstrip where contact owed her a favor, a pilot who ran black flights for anyone who could pay. As they approached, Morgan caught a glint from the hills. Her instincts screamed. Down, she shouted, shoving behind a concrete barrier as the first shot cracked through the air. A sniper round punched into the wall where his head had been seconds before. Another followed, then automatic fire from the ridge. They found us, gasped. Move west, Morgan barked, firing back in controlled bursts. The rifle felt natural in her hands again, like muscle memory fused with willpower. She dropped one shadowed figure, saw another retreat, then covered as they sprinted for the hangar. Inside, the pilot was already starting the engines, eyes wide. Who the hell are you bringing trouble to my door for? Fly, Morgan ordered, anywhere north now. The plane roared down the cracked runway as tracers lit the night behind them. When they finally lifted off, Morgan looked down, seeing muzzle flashes shrinking into darkness. She holstered her rifle, breath steady, eyes hard. Looked shaken. That wasn't random. No, Morgan said quietly, that was cleanup. Hours later, the small transport touched down on a remote airstrip in Romania, a quiet refueling point used by covert teams moving between theaters. The pilot refueled in silence, sat slumped against the wall, exhausted. Morgan stood outside, staring at the fading horizon. She felt the weight of his compass in her pocket. Even now the needle pointed west, toward home, toward the truth. Joined her, pulling her jacket. You could still walk away, go dark, let it die. Morgan shook her head slowly. People already died. Walking away doesn't bring them back, but maybe finding who gave that order, maybe that gives it meaning. Looked at her, really looked. You sound like him. Morgan smiled faintly. That's the idea. They climbed back aboard as the first light of dawn touched the sky. A new day, same war. But now the battlefield had names. Raptor Systems, Credential, Command, Silence. Morgan leaned back, closing her eyes for the first time in days. Sleep didn't come easy, but the dreams that followed were clear. A convoy burning in slow motion, a compass spinning, and a voice whispering. Make it expensive for them. Thousands of miles away, in a sterile office overlooking Arlington, a man in a tailored suit stared at a report marked classified. Priority red. At the top, subject, unauthorized resurrection, Morgan Alexis J. He tapped his pen against the page. She's alive, he said softly. A woman across the desk looked nervous. Sir, we've confirmed activity on the Ghost server. It's been breached. By who? Unknown, possibly. The man sighed, folding the report. Then it's time to make sure she stays dead. He turned toward the window, the city lights reflecting in his eyes. We warned them once, he said. Now we remind them why ghosts don't talk. And somewhere over Europe, Alexis Morgan's eyes snapped open mid-flight, heart pounding, skin cold. She didn't know why, but she felt it. Somewhere, someone had just decided her second death would need to be permanent. She reached into her pocket and gripped compass tight. Try me, she whispered. I'm not done yet. Sometimes the truth doesn't kill you. It just waits until you're strong enough to face it. What do you do when the enemy's flag is the same color as yours? The dawn over Romania was cold, pale, silent. A new morning that felt more like a warning than a beginning. Alexis Morgan stood outside the hangar, eyes tracing the line where night bled into light. The compass in her hand caught the sunrise and reflected it in a dull glint, like a heartbeat trapped in brass. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was hunting. Behind her, packed gear into a black duffel, laptops, hard drives, signal intercept tools. We can't hit Raptor directly, said, voice tight. They're buried behind 10 layers of government contracts. Touch the wrong server and we'll be flagged before the page even loads. Then we don't touch their system, Morgan said. We make them come to us. Frowned. You planning to bait $1 billion contractor? Morgan's voice was calm. You bait men, not systems. Somewhere in that company there's a human link, someone feeding orders to whoever killed my team. That's where we hit. She slung her rifle over her shoulder and looked toward the horizon. Where's their nearest operating site? Opened her laptop, the screen reflecting in her eyes. Closest forward node is in Munich. Officially, it's a logistics coordination office. Unofficially, it's where encrypted comms from field contractors get processed. Morgan's expression didn't change. Then that's where we start. By the next night, they were in Germany, a city that pretended not to notice the shadows living inside it. Morgan wore a plain jacket, her hair tucked under a cap, carried a messenger bag heavy with tech. They looked like tired travelers, not two women on the edge of starting an international incident. Raptor Systems, Munich branch sat behind mirrored glass walls, an anonymous building among hundreds. No signage, no guards visible, just quiet efficiency, the way power hides in plain sight. They set up in a rented flat across the street, unpacked her gear and got to work. Morgan watched through binoculars, scanning the movements inside the building. Late-night employees, security rotations, patterns of light and shadow. They work in shifts, Morgan said. Top floor handles encrypted transmissions. Whoever's there past midnight, that's your admin. Nodded, already on it. She tapped away at her keyboard, hijacking a nearby network relay. The hum of the laptop filled the silence like a heartbeat. Minutes passed, then froze, got a live signal. Morgan leaned closer. From who? Turned the screen toward her. Internal message chain between Raptor Systems Munich and a dude in DC. It's tagged as Ghost Reconciliation. Morgan frowned. What does that mean? His voice dropped. They're still trying to erase you. The screen showed a string of data. Operation CLENFRME, Priority Red, Author, J. Reeves, Raptor Executive OPS. Directive, remove all residual field anomalies. Subject, Morgan Alexis J. Viper 2 Actual. Status, breach risk. Asset termination authorized. Morgan stared at the words. Her name. Her death rewritten, scheduled, approved. Looked up, Reeves. That's the first real name we've got. Morgan's eyes hardened. Then we find him. 2 days later, they tracked Jonathan Reeves to a defense symposium in Brussels. A quiet conference where powerful people pretended to discuss ethics while cutting deals behind closed doors. Reeves was ex-military, polished, mid-40s, the kind of man who smiled too easily and shook hands like he was measuring the pulse beneath your skin. They watched him from the mezzanine as he laughed with foreign contractors, a whiskey in hand. His badge read, Raptor Systems, Executive Liaison, Strategic Programs. Whispered, that's him. Coordinates match his security profile. Morgan's jaw flexed. Does he know what he signed? Shrugged, people like him don't sign things. They authorize them. They followed from a distance as Reeves left the hotel later that evening, heading toward an underground parking lot. Morgan's steps were soundless, calculated, predatory. When Reeves reached his car, she was already there, leaning against it, shadow half-lit by the flickering yellow light. He froze. Can I help you? Morgan tilted her head slightly. Jonathan Reeves. He blinked, cautious. Who's asking? The ghost you tried to bury. Confusion flickered across his face, then fear. He took a step back. Morgan, you're dead, she finished softly. That's what they told me too. She stepped forward, close enough that he could see the scar on her temple, the exhaustion in her eyes, the steadiness in her stance. I know about Raptor, about the ghost server, about Operation. Reeves tried to regain his composure. You have no idea what you're talking about. Then enlighten me, she said. Why did my convoy die? Who signed the order that sent us into that valley? He hesitated too long. Morgan's tone dropped to a whisper. Say his name. Reeves swallowed hard. You don't understand. It wasn't supposed to. It wasn't personal. Everything's personal when your team burns, she said coldly. He looked away. We were following directives from Washington, oversight-level clearance. I don't even have the full chain. Who gave the directive? I can't. She slammed him against the car, forearm to his chest. Who? His voice cracked. General. The name hung in the air like a gunshot. Morgan stepped back slowly, letting him breathe. Her pulse pounded in her ears. A man she'd only seen on mission briefings, the kind of officer who never got his hands dirty but somehow owned the blood on everyone else. Why, she asked. Reeves hesitated, defeated. Your team stumbled onto a weapons route that wasn't supposed to exist. Black shipments routed through private channels. They couldn't risk exposure. You were collateral. Morgan's jaw tightened. Collateral. Listen, Reeves said quickly. You can't win this. Untouchable. He owns Raptor, owns the oversight committee, even owns half the data trails. If you go after him, you'll disappear for real this time. She looked him dead in the eye. Then I'll make sure he disappears first. He stared at her, and for a moment, saw something in her eyes that stripped him of every illusion about control. It wasn't rage, it wasn't vengeance. It was certainty, the kind that only came from someone with nothing left to lose. Morgan turned to leave. Behind her, Reeves called out weakly, "What are you going to do?" She didn't look back, finish what they started. That night found her sitting on the edge of a riverbank, the city lights flickering across the water. "You got your name," said softly. "General, that's the top of the chain." Morgan nodded. "Then the chain breaks tomorrow." "You're serious?" "I've been serious since Kandahar." Sighed, "If you go after him, you won't make it back." Morgan looked at her. "I already didn't." Silence stretched, then said quietly, "If you're going to do this, I'm in." Morgan frowned. "You don't have to be." "I know, that's why it means something." They shared a long look, a quiet understanding forged in exhaustion, trust, and defiance. "All right," Morgan said finally. "Then we hit where he can't hide his data network. You break in, I break through." Smiled faintly. "You make it sound easy." "It won't be," Morgan said. "Nothing worth doing ever is." By morning, the operation was in motion. Set up a portable command rig inside an abandoned communications substation. Morgan prepped her, compact carbine, sidearm, feed, encrypted link. The plan was simple, brutal, and precise. Would breach Raptor's data vault remotely. Morgan would infiltrate a Raptor field node in Brussels, the one transmitting directly to his office. They exfiltrate evidence before the system purged itself. Checked her watch. "Once we start, they'll trace us in 5 minutes, tops." "Then we'll only need 4, Morgan said. Gave a thin smile. "You really are insane." "Yeah," Morgan said, "but I'm alive." The first phase went flawlessly. Cracked the firewall using an old clearance cipher, one she'd written herself years ago before being fired for security incompatibility. Raptor's system opened like a vault door creaking under its own arrogance. Inside, encrypted files began streaming across the link. Contracts, signatures, directives. Then found it. Operation Iron Kite, classified. Authorization, general. Purpose, stabilization by indirect intervention, non-attributable. It detailed weapons shipments, mercenary deployments and missions, including the one that killed's team. And there, buried in the digital ink, a single line that made Morgan's throat tighten. Viper 2 convoy, marked expendable for cover integrity. The world seemed to go silent around her. She stared at the screen, fists trembling. Her entire unit reduced to 2 words, marked expendable. She took a long breath. Download everything. His fingers moved fast. Done. I'm sending copies to 3 dead drops across the net. They can't erase this. Good, Morgan said, because now we're done hiding. But Raptor's counterintuition hit faster than expected. The system locked down, alarms blaring. His voice crackled through Morgan's earpiece. "They've traced us. You need to move now." Morgan was already running down the corridors, boots pounding, heart steady. Guards shouted behind her, weapons raised. She cut through a maintenance stairwell, ducked behind cover, returned fire. 2 guards down, smoke, chaos. She said, panting, "Burn everything, go dark." "Already on it," replied. "Morgan, don't die on me." Morgan smiled faintly. "I'll try to disappoint them again." She burst through the side exit, just as the first siren hit the street. Cold air, wet pavement. Freedom for now. She disappeared into the city crowd like a ghost, slipping between realities. Back in the command building, General stood over a monitor, jaw clenched, watching live feeds of chaos in Brussels. He turned to his aide. "She's still alive." "Yes, sir." He exhaled sharply. "Then she just declared war." That night, Morgan and regrouped in an abandoned train depot outside the city. The files were safe, the names were real. And for the first time since Kandahar, Morgan felt something she hadn't in years. Purpose. She held his compass, tracing the edges with her thumb. The needle quivered but never broke. Asked quietly, "What now?" Morgan looked at the horizon, calm, steady, sure. "Now," she said, "we stop surviving." She looked up, eyes dark but alive. "We start fighting back. There's a point where truth stops asking for permission. That's the point where ghosts become soldiers again. Who do you call when the people who write the rules have been writing deaths instead?" The phones in Brussels were ringing off the hook. So were the secure lines in Arlington. So were the inboxes of men who had never expected anyone to read the things they thought buried. Staff Sergeant Alexis Morgan watched the city lights smear past as she rode a borrowed motorcycle through back alleys. Her jaw was a hard line. Her body was tired. Her mind was electric with a single thing: consequence. She had found paper proof. She had found a signature. Now she intended to make the signature mean something in public. Beside her rode Pillion, laptop bag tight against her ribs, fingers folded over the encrypted drive like an amulet. She smelled faintly of coffee and adrenaline. Determination changed her face the way war had carved. She was anxious. That nervousness sharpened her. Morgan liked that. It made human. It made her useful. They were heading to one place, a safe house with a transmitter and a single connection to a handful of journalists who still respected the word verify. Not many, but those few could make the right noise. They arrived as the sky cracked into dawn. The safe house held little more than a radio mast and a man who trusted his life to truth. He nodded when Morgan walked in. No one asked for credentials. No one needed them. Her wounds, the way she moved, and the files were proof enough. Fed the files into the encoder. The screen filled with names, dates, bank transfers, contract numbers, and a line that made the hairs on Morgan's arms rise. Operation Iron Kite Authorization. Marked expendable. Viper 2 convoy. The room went quiet save for the click of keyboards. Outside, the city still slept. Inside, a storm built. The journalist on the other end of the connection had small eyes and big nerves. He wanted evidence, not just accusation. Offered it. The encrypted packets contained satellite timestamps, phone logs, wire transfers to offshore accounts tied to shell companies employed by Raptor Systems. The paper trail smelled of smoke and lawyers. "Publish," Morgan said. "Do you understand what this will do?" the journalist asked. He hesitated. He was the sort of man who knew his children's faces and the shape of his mortgage. He worried. "Yes," Morgan said. "I understand everything it will do." He worried more. "You'll be branded, they'll come for you hard." "She's already been branded dead," said. "Death is already on her ledger." The journalist swallowed and hit send. Minutes later, the world shifted. A story dropped, an explosive sourced piece in 3 international outlets. Screens splintered into headlines. Secure servers in defense corridors blinked red. Men in suits spilled into rooms. Names that had been polite turned jagged in public speech. His name echoed from CNN to every secure chat that mattered. Raptor Systems demanded retractions. Congressional aides typed frantic emails. The Pentagon convened a crisis cell. And in one quiet office, a man styled with silver hair and slow hands, General, watched the chaos with a face like weathered stone. "It begins," he said. "When truth leaves a small room and goes into the world, it does not go alone. It carries consequences, liabilities. People who thought themselves untouchable suddenly felt cold. And they reacted as predators do, with speed, force, and the brutal mathematics of survival. Convened his inner circle, he accused, he rebranded. He issued a statement that cycled the language he needed: stabilization, non-attributable support, national security prerogatives. He spoke as if he were describing a surgical procedure rather than a massacre. But people read between the lines, and the proof was public now. Bank records, satellite coordinates, the phrase marked expendable. Those words could be traced. Those accounts could be followed, had options. He chose the one that kept him safest: make the problem disappear. He called the contractors, executives who moved like bankers and commanded the muscle of private security. He had men who could threaten, bribe, or eliminate. He had men who could corrupt an investigation by calling the right senator or escorting the right prosecutor into retirement. Contain the leak, said, quietly, make it look like a forgery, then find her and make sure she can't speak. It sounded eerily bureaucratic, a man who ordered killings with spreadsheets. Back in the safe house, Morgan felt it like a pressure drop. The air around them tightened. The journalist had been brave. He had also given them a window into an enormous hornet's nest. Now the hornets swarmed. Messages arrived: threats, denials, anonymous warnings. Raptor Systems hired a private probe. People sent a lawyer with the patience of an executioner. The Pentagon released a statement calling the leaks under investigation but warned against unauthorized disclosures. Press at noon, Morgan said. She felt numb, distant. Every interview would be a trap. Every camera, a mouth hungry for her words but also the shape of her life. They dodged public appearances. They moved fractal: new safe house, new number, new faces. Worked the back channels, tracking inquiries, knotting patterns. The enemy's reach was broad, but their haste made them sloppy. That sloppiness was their strength. Morgan's plan was not to survive the hunt. It was to direct it. If wanted to silence her, he would have to reveal where he put his evidence, who carried his orders, and how he moved his money. To get there, she needed bait, an obvious trail that promised access to but led to men who could be observed, recorded, and exposed. They slipped a rumor into the net, a breadcrumb that any careful predator would follow. A fake lead pointing to a mid-level Raptor operative in Madrid rumored to be moving incriminating hardware. Private security took the bait fast. Men on the ground moved to intercept. Morgan and watched from afar as the trap unfurled. Cameras, tailors, assault teams, they recorded everything. Drones hummed overhead. His laptop thrummed with video feeds. Her fingers flew as she tagged timestamps, faces, license plates. The Madrid man was real. The men who came for him were mercenaries with corporate IDs, men with smiles like knives. But they were sloppy enough for to trace back to a shell company with ties to Raptor. Sloppy enough for a warrant to be served later. Sloppy enough for a man who thought himself invisible to be photographed with his face. When the mercenaries closed the net, Morgan stepped into the light. She walked into the plaza, boots on the cobblestones, face uncovered. She moved like someone who had nothing to lose. Two mercenaries approached, aggressive, palms hovering near holsters. Morgan raised her hands, slow, unarmed. "You Raptor's dogs?" she asked. The lead man smiled. "We're just contractors, we keep things safe." "You work for Raptor," she said, "and Raptor works for men who kill." He blinked, misinterpreting the tone. "Careful." Morgan didn't look careful. She leaned close and whispered, "This man pointing to the Madrid operative is evidence. You take him to someone who will want to pay for him. You take him, Raptor pays you twice the normal rate. Pull him to a safe house, make the transfer." It was a play they'd both read before, money as bait. The mercenaries took it. They moved at midnight, followed their comms trail. Morgan watched as the transfer point lit up in her feed. She fed the coordinates to a journalist with integrity. The news network placed a camera across the street. The mercenaries thought they'd gotten the man. They didn't see the satellite capture, the drone angle, the live feed to the world. When the mercenaries made the handoff, the world saw the exchange, the passports, the cash, the Raptor ID on the table. The men who'd thought themselves anonymous were suddenly on screens in living rooms worldwide. Their contractors' plates were traced. Their handlers' accounts were mapped. They had pulled the wrong teeth. His reaction was immediate and brutal. He cut funding to the private teams. He called in favors. He threatened hearings. He ordered people to lie. He also ordered others to act. Hunts aren't just about force. They're about the threat of force, about the feeling that the world can make you disappear if you cross the right line. Unleashed both the lawyers and the soldiers of the private world. Men with no official badge, men who answered to old money and older grudges, men who had zero patience for journalists and 2 minutes of sympathy for a ghost soldier. Morgan expected action, but she did not expect. Was a man who moved like a closing fist. He had been cleaner before the name, cleaner, went out of fashion and became risk mitigation specialist. He had scars that told the truth of their own. He had a laugh that started at his throat and finished in a coffin. He arrived in Europe with 2 goals: find Morgan and make the world forget why it ever asked questions. He began by picking small things apart: a safe house breached, a camera destroyed, a journalist threatened with ruin. Noticed patterns: certain servers watched, certain banks pinged. His network was surgical, it left no blood, only strategic holes. "You worried?" asked one night as they watched the feeds. "I am always worried," Morgan said. Worry for her was like oxygen, essential and always present, but worry didn't stop her. Action did. They altered the pattern. They moved the safe journalist. They leaked a red herring about new documents in Moscow, took it, and he went. That was the small victory. The big one came when overreached. He decided the best way to end the story was to erase its protagonist in a public, demonstrative way: kidnap, leave bones, send a message. He chose a route through a remote border crossing. He moved men and vehicles. He trusted the same arrogance that had failed his employer before, the belief that money could buy invisibility. They underestimated the wire. Had been tracking men for days. They'd tapped into a supply chain depended upon, one of those private logistics webs that crossed borders in secret. Fed a subtle signal into the chain, 2 simple bytes that shifted manifest by a single vehicle number, a misrouted truck, a delay. Moved his men into position. The night air tasted of diesel and blood. They took the bait. Morgan lay in the dark across the border from the crossing, watching. She had a rifle, but she had something else too: witnesses. Cameras, drones, journalists flown in on standby. She wanted the world to see what would do. Men surrounded the truck. They took what they wanted: information. The Madrid operative who had been the bait. They burned the van. They left no survivors. But then they tried to move inland to a pickup point that was now watched by every lens they had in their service. Morgan picked her moment. She didn't fire into the dark, she stepped into it. Her body was a shape moving between vehicles and men like a hand slicing through cloth. She caught the nearest man by surprise, disarmed him, used his radio to send a message into his ear: cease fire. We see you. Back off or we will too. From his vantage 50 meters away, laughed. He thought he could beat the broadcast. He thought the fear of exposure would stop her. He was wrong. The world watched as Morgan stepped into the light of his gunfire and took down a mercenary with a blunt, precise blow. She was bloody, not because of hesitation, but because she chose to make the world see the cost of that choice. The live feed cut between her and the faces of men as they realized the lie had built. Men who had been promised anonymity now recognized the smell of public outrage. Retreated that night, not because he was weak, but because sometimes even monsters see angles that end badly. The world did not immediately fix itself. Names were not promptly given up. Corruption did not evaporate like fog. Men with power still had power, and generals still had friends. But the leak grew, more came forward, bank accounts were frozen, subpoenas flew, congressional committees convened. Statements tasted of panic. Morgan watched it all, hollow and steady. She had not wanted to be a spectacle, but Compass had never asked permission. There were larger truths at play, that loyalty is not a ledger, that honor cannot be signed away with a pen, and that those who hide in the shade must live with the light. That night, as slept for the first time without waking to the sound of an incoming tracer, Morgan sat on the roof of the safe house and looked at the needle in the compass. It still pointed west. It always had. She thought of the men who had died because another man decided their lives were expendable. She closed her fist around the brass hard enough to bruise. "You wanted it expensive," she whispered to the empty sky. "You got it." And somewhere, in a small office with new walls and a new nameplate, General picked up his phone. "Find her," he said, voice tired but resolute. "And make sure the world doesn't get used to this kind of scandal twice." Morgan smiled without humor. The hunt would continue, so would the cost. She folded the compass into her palm and felt its weight. The fight had not ended. It had only become clearer. Sometimes you light a match to see what burns. Sometimes the thing that burns is not the enemy you expected. And the closest fires always leave the deepest scars. Why does the last step always feel like the first step in a new war? Alexis Morgan stood on a rooftop that smelled of rain and diesel, the city lights below like a constellation of compromises. She had wrestled ghosts into daylight, watched men with uniforms peel off like masks, followed money into the quiet places where decisions are made and lives are priced. The files had burned a hole through the secrecy, the public had howled, committees had convened. But truth does not mean safety. It means consequence. And consequences always have a cost. She had expected to fight back. She had not expected the way he tried to dress reprisal in law. He used subpoenas and secrecy orders. He called hearings and demanded sanctions. He leaned on men who owed him favors. He moved like someone trying to rearrange the world so it would stop noticing him. It almost worked until people started remembering faces. There were moments when Morgan felt older than she was. There were moments she felt younger. Confusion sat beside resolve, an old and unwelcome duet. Part of her wanted to walk away, find a quiet place and fill the hollows with small tasks and the regularity of life. Another part, the part it built into her, refused. Not because of glory, because of debt. Not for vengeance, for accountability. That was the crux. She had been trained to leave no one. Now she had to extend that promise into a world that had forgotten how to keep it. The crisis committees did their theater. Cameras peered into smoke-filled rooms, defended himself with phrases engineered to comfort people who did not know how badly they'd been lied to. Strategic necessity, protecting assets, minimizing collateral. He sounded like a man who had believed his own script for too long, but the files were cold and clear. They did not speak in euphemism. They spoke in signatures and timestamps and bank transfers. They said what a man had done, not why he convinced himself it was right. Called it structural rot. The code had been the manifest, the contractor the tool, but the rot ran up and down a ladder with polite brass knobs and quiet phone lines. They were close. Evidence had been replicated into multiple safe drops across the web and in the hands of people who would not be bought off by lawyers or threats. The mercenaries in courtrooms could try to strangle each thread, but the fabric had already been shown. Tonight, they would press the last chip into the system. Morgan checked her gear not because she liked the ritual, but because she needed the certainty of it. Weapons, yes, but more important. A small recorder, a wrist camera, an old seal-field notebook for names and dates, compass warm in her palm. She felt the familiar press of blood and the peculiar calm that comes before action. The plan was surgical, public, and ugly in a way that fit the moment. Their target was not the man in Arlington directly. It was the meeting room where his allies met to stitch plausible deniability into policy. A closed-door summit in a government building, men who believed they were insulated by titles and process. They believed voices muffled by layers of power would be safe. They were wrong. Worked the tech from a van 2 blocks away, fingers moving with the precision of someone who had spent years teaching machines to listen. Morgan moved alone through the corridors toward the press gallery. She had arranged for a spontaneous question to be asked at a hearing that had been scheduled as a climate briefing, an odd theater for their exposure, but exactly the kind of misdirection that kept men comfortable. The gallery would list a citizen question. The camera would cut. Her recorder would speak. She took the seat nobody noticed, the same way ghosts found corners in rooms where light collected. Her chest tightened, fear, yes, but with a different flavor now, anticipation of a reckoning. The hearing began. Polite introductions, a bland preface about national security, the usual framing. Sat in the witness chair, polished, patient, the kind of man who had worn loyalty like a second skin. He spoke with practiced gravity about the burdens of command. The cameras lapped at his words. When the floor opened, the moderator called the registered names. Morgan's name did not appear. That was the point. A man in the second row rose, ostensibly a concerned citizen. He cleared his throat and offered a carefully prepared question. "General, can you explain why your authorization chain uses private contractors to move high-value shipments without congressional oversight?" The moderator steered him, politely, back toward climate, the machine learning of the hearing flexing against the unexpected. Morgan stood. "Sir," she said, voice low but carried by the mic, "you authorized shipments that resulted in the deaths of my team." His eyes flicked to the gallery, then back, a faint twitch in his jaw. The room took a breath, the way you do when you see a fracture in the ground. She spoke plainly. She had rehearsed none of this for spectacle. She spoke because she had to. She named dates. She named files. She named the bank transfers and the shell companies. She spoke about the convoy in Kandahar, about a man who pulled a grenade because he had been betrayed by his own uniform. Her voice was patient, a scalpel. Cameras chased. The world saw a woman stand in a public chamber and refuse decorum in favor of testimony. The live feed spiked. Tweets filled timelines. The hearing room, which had felt like a theater of polite indifference, became an arena. As operatives leaned forward, allies in the room reached for their phones. He spoke then, smooth and practiced, attempting to reframe her words as an emotional outburst, a soldier's trauma bleeding into policy questions. He offered sympathy as deflection. Morgan did not waver. Watching the feed from the van, fed the moderator's laptop with encrypted packets, the files, the raw bank transfers, the satellite images, the internal memos. In real time, the record was altered from doubt to evidence. Every question flung back at her was met by a document on the screen. The moderator stammered, the hearing chair blinked, and men in suits who had believed themselves untouchable felt an unfamiliar pressure. There was a moment, 2 seconds, where the room waited. Justice does not often move at the speed of a breath, but sometimes it does. The hearing was adjourned abruptly. Cameras followed as he exited into the corridors. He walked tall. He did not know whether he still had the ground under his feet or if the tiles were simply a stage. Men in dark suits approached Morgan as she left the gallery. They offered medical evaluation, a polite escort. The press wanted comment. She let none of it claim her. The world would argue for months about legality and policy, but she had forced a crack in the machine. That was enough for now. Days followed like chapters in a single long, tired book. Congressional subpoenas were issued. Communications were seized. Raptor's executives bailated out into the quiet of lawyers and denials. Bank accounts froze as investigators chased the paper trail. Some officers were suspended. A few names disappeared behind faxes and sealed orders, replaced by temporary nowheres. It was not clean justice. It was the kind of messy, bureaucratic pressure that sometimes renders a network impotent. People were indicted. Others fled to quiet lives in countries that didn't ask questions. Some men who had once walked a room with the certainty of impunity found that certainty riddled with holes. Morgan watched it all from somewhere outside the limelight, the way she had watched an ambush unfold years before, calculating, quiet, hardening. She slept less. She ate less. She felt the hollow where victory should have fit. This was not the singular gavel strike every soldier secretly imagines. It was a long grinding of cogs, hearings, and loss. It was daylight, bureaucratic and distant. And yet something shifted. His name was mentioned in testimony. His face, drawn from a memory, lingered on a screen. That was a kind of return. The fight did not end when indictments landed. Monuments of power do not collapse overnight. Hired the sharpest defense teams money could buy. His men tried to manipulate hearings. They leaked counter-narratives, accusing thee and their journalists of forgery. They called witnesses unreliable. They fought in the only language they knew, delay. Morgan felt the pressure of being a symbol, more imposing, sometimes, than being a person. People wanted her to stand and be a moral machine for them. She could not be that on command. She was messy, broken, human. She needed quiet moments to be private and rough edges to mend. There came a night when sat with her on a roof overlooking the same city. They had fought, lost, maneuvered, and won in ways that meant little to ordinary days. "You wanted this expensive," Morgan said softly, returning the phrase that had seeded into her like an engine. It had become a mantra. It had become a debt ledger. They paid. Hummed without humor. They paid in hearings and lawyers. That's not always the kind of cost you want. Not the kind I wanted, Morgan admitted. But it's the kind that lets people breathe slowly for a bit. They listened to the distant hum of the city. Somewhere, a child laughed. The sound was thin through the concrete, but Morgan tasted it like an old promise. There would be reprisals. There would be small men trying to get even. There would be legal fights and bureaucratic delays and probably more blood. Maybe she would be hunted again. Maybe she would be compelled to disappear into another night. But then she thought of the way he'd given her his compass, not as a relic but as instruction. She thought of the last thing he'd said, be expensive to hunt. Make them pay, not for spite but for worth. She reached into her pack and for the first time since Kandahar placed compass on the rooftop ledge in the pale city light. The needle quivered and settled, pointing west as it always had. She touched it, feeling the cold brass against her thumb. Sometimes dignity is a quiet act. Sometimes justice moves with slow, bureaucratic rhythms that are ugly and necessary. Sometimes you do not get the clean ending you were owed in movies. You get hearings and indictments and a legal mess that takes years. You get broken men who go to jail and others who buy new names. You get the slow clearing of a table, one plate at a time. She stood, pulling the compass into her hand, feeling its weight. The world had been a cruel ledger. She had added an entry that read, "Not on my watch." She closed her fist around the brass and let the city breathe around her. Sometimes dignity doesn't shout, it doesn't beg, it simply acts.